So, Jack Mattingly, you are a self-proclaimed songwriter-singer, very important distinction.
That's right.
And you've been doing this for quite some time. You draw a lot of inspiration from the 50s, the 70s, and 90s. For some reason, you like to skip decades.
Yeah, I don't know why that happened, but it
It
did.
is what it is. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming to the show. I
Yeah.
really appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, if you can give us a little bit more insight as to why you're a songwriter-singer as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, well, so I guess it's probably, I think, just because I'm a better songwriter than I am a singer, and
Sure.
that's not to be insulting myself, but I just know that there's singers who are singers, where their instrument is to really sing.
Yeah.
They have better control on their voice, maybe a broader range, more styles they can do. I've got one style I can do with my voice, and then songwriting is what I focus on, what I mainly focus on. When I first started playing guitar, I learned just enough that I could start writing songs. And then I was like, I have no interest in learning for this, which is a terrible habit. And if there's somebody watching and listening, don't do that. Uh, it's good to learn your instrument and to stick with it. But I kind of put guitar player third even, it's songwriter, singer, guitar player. And so I just liked writing songs. And I've always liked writing even from young age before I could play music or even really was singing that much. I've always preferred to write, and so that's my number one passion.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, when I learned guitar, I did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I learned 4 chords so I
Yep.
can do the progression. I learned it in a
Yeah.
couple of different keys,
Love
and then I
that.
was off to the singing races. So
Yeah,
I got you.
totally. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people that have done it that way, and I've definitely gotten better since I started out. But I've never put enough focus in being like a lead player. And it's not that I couldn't do it, and I'm sure that I could, and I'd have fun, but it just wasn't where I wanted to focus my time, I wanted to focus mainly on just writing and expressing myself that way. And there are people that express themselves through lead playing or, whatever their instrument is, and I love that just as much as songwriting. It's just that I was able to do it with words better, I guess, than notes.
So what aspect of songwriting really speaks to you? Is it the words and the storytelling? Is it the emotions? Is it
I would say that like the words and the storytelling is a lot of how I started. As of lately, this recent band that I'm in, I'm learning to write from a different place than I used to, and that's kind of fun for me because I am writing from more of a flow state. Sitting down and it's more of an energy, feeling what's coming out of me, and it may not be my best lyrically, but it's definitely emotionally, like you were saying, or energetically. It's I don't know. It's more fulfilling as far as like just getting that out of me, right? And so there's a little bit with the new album that I'm working on right now, or that's almost done. There's a little bit more. I don't want to say angst because I'm not a teenager, but it's essentially the same thing. Yeah, there's a little bit of it was that the pandemic, right? We were all inside for a while. And then all of a sudden, it's like there's this stuff that is inside that needs to come out. There's this anxiousness, is sometimes anger, and sometimes I don't know. I guess angst has to be the word.
I mean, no, that seems pretty fitting. Like, I don't know about you. I feel like that 2 to 3 year period in my life,
Yeah.
both was incredibly long and also very short.
Yeah,
Like all
yeah.
of the time just blends
It
together.
was weird.
Yeah.
It was so weird. I don't know. Like I'm still not sure that we've quite recovered from it. I just like something changed, and I don't know. Nothing can go back, obviously, and that's fine. You wouldn't want it to, but it definitely has changed something in everybody. And I think when we get 20 years away from it, we're gonna look and we're gonna name some of those things. We're gonna be able to see what they are. But right now, we're still kind of in it,
Yeah, I mean, so to date myself, I'm 31 years old, and the amount of once in a lifetime things that I've had to deal with is just
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. That's a defining moment, in history.
Yep.
Is post-COVID, pre-COVID. And
Yeah, that is the kind of one of the before and afters of our generation.
yeah, for sure. Like there's 9/11 was before that,
Yep.
Hi, Monty.
He's going to make sure that he's acknowledged and recognized.
Yeah,
of
no,
course.
I like that. I think you always want to keep the dog in the picture.
Absolutely. But okay, so a lot more angst in this coming album than the stuff that you're writing.
Yeah. It's being mixed right now, and I just got the most recent mixes of it. And so I've been listening to them, and as I've been listening to them, I've been trying to figure out like what it is that that we're saying as a band.
Yeah.
And I think it's a documentation of small town living. Ultimately, is that every song it focuses on alcohol, drugs, and small town.
It sounds like a small town. Yeah.
It really is. And some of those, the listener might be thinking like, oh man, he's speaking from first person. But on a lot of the songs, I'm not really speaking first person. I'm just gathering the world around me that I live in, and I'm just singing based on what I see.
Okay. Yeah.
And giving a slice of small town life. So there's some of the songs are personal, and some of them are actually just like I'm just grabbing the stories of everybody else that's around me and putting them into a song.
Okay.
So, and there's some, we have a song, it's called Legal Dose, and it's about drinking and drugs and what that looks like in the community I'm in, because fentanyl is a real thing, and I see it on the,
I see it everywhere.
yeah. And it's like, it's different. The way seeing it in a city and seeing it in the small town in the country, it's like it's the same crisis, but it just looks a little different, right? Like, because it's like people sleeping in their cars along the side of the road, like in a rural road. It looks like somebody's broke down, but then there's all these cars, and you're walking by roads that you grew up on. They didn't look like this, and the same with cities, obviously, but it's not going to be cars. It's just like you're going to be seeing the people, right? And so it's like, so there's that. And all the people that make a judgment on that, but those are the same people that go to a bar. And I can go into any bar in my small town, and I can look at those people sitting on a bar stool, slumped over. Yep. But they're like, well, I'm not that guy. But it's like, but you are that guy. Your drugs accepted and it's legal.
Yes, there's a very big discrimination against these substances.
Yeah, it's just like, I mean, I could see that somebody might listen to the song and think like there's a line that we all sing, I think I'll just sit here and drink, and it's a part of the chorus at the end. And some people might listen and be like, oh, that's a party anthem. And that's fine, right. But that's not what it's about. It's about like, I think I'll just sit here and drink a legal dose of poison so I don't have to think. And that there are certain things that are legal for that exact purpose, to stop you from thinking about what's going on around you and the way that somebody might have their thumb on you.
Okay.
And so that's what this album is kind of documenting, and that's what I mean. It has a little more anger and a little bit more like attitude, I suppose. But hey, sometimes it's got to come out, and that's what songwriting is great for.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I love the facet of creativity, and especially the arts, to where you can kind of express these harsh realities of life in a little bit more of a palatable way. Like a couple episodes ago, I was talking to a comedian, and they were saying like they can distill some very like harsh things about life, like suicide, depression, very deep and dark topics, but viewed through the lens of comedy so that it is palatable, but it can also still reach the audience that needs to hear it. I think the same power exists within music.
It's totally. I mean, it's like a chocolate covered almond or something. It's like, like, hey, it's really sweet on the inside, but inside this is the stuff that's good for you. That's not as fun without the chocolate.
Yeah.
It's just like that. But comedy especially can push some ideas that people aren't ready to hear, but then like give you a punchline. You're like, oh, okay, that felt good. But also,
see, I also love the angle that you're taking, because I'll take a step back.
Yeah.
We see writers for, novels and books and such. They gather a bunch of resources, materials to then craft a story that they themselves may not have personal experience in, but they've done the research. They get representation of the stories that they're telling from actual people who have lived it.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're doing something very similar with your music.
Totally. And I think that's like that the writer still wants to express those things and still has a passion to do that, and is driven to like whatever subject it is. Because of the world around them. And so, I do the same with songwriting, and some of them are very personal, that are just, they are a personal song, and some of them are drawing from, I guess that still makes it personal because it's the world around me, right? And I think that's like my biggest thing when I try to give advice to any artist, really. Not that I'm somebody that needs to be giving advice to other artists, but just like, just observing the world around you, and that will come through your art, and it will make it unique. Then that fine line between influence, right? Like having your influences, but not being a ripoff.
Yes.
And I think that like, it's okay to hear people's influences. Some people don't like it. Like, I don't want it to sound like Neil Young, or I don't want it to sound like whoever, like I think it's okay to have those coming through
Yeah.
because it's a part of who made you, or who made, made that, the music that you're making, or who played a part in that music.
Yeah.
But there is like, you still have to find your own voice
Yes.
and set that apart. You can't just be a imitation or rip off.
Yeah, I think, times and places in your journey, that's okay. Like when you're first starting out, like find your influences, embrace them super hard. To a degree, it's okay to be a copycat because you're just trying to figure things out. So long as you don't sit in that space for too long and you eventually find your own voice.
Yeah.
then that's cool.
Yeah, totally. And that's like, I think every country music artist, like when it first started, like I spent a lot of time reading books, listening to books and documentaries. I just find country music fascinating. It's like, I tell people it's my favorite and least favorite type of music because there's such bad country music. They're like, this is country. I'm like, man, if that's country music, I might actually hate this music. And then there's some that's so authentic that's from the 50s or the 40s, or, like, it's just really, it's poor people singing about being poor.
Yeah.
And so it's a real way of life. But all of those artists sounded like the ones before them. The same thing, like you're saying, is when you first start out, you're kind of a carbon copy of the people that influenced you because that's what you know.
Yeah.
And then you have to find your own voice. And so, Ernest Tubb sounded like Jimmy Rogers, and then George Jones sounded like Hank Williams until he sounded like George Jones, and all, Merle Haggard wanted to sound like Ernest Tubb until he sounded like Merle Haggard. So all these guys sounded like somebody else until somebody said, hey man, you sound just like them. Your writing is great, but you have to sound like you. And then they found that thing that made them them.
Yeah. I think when you draw upon more influences, it's, I don't know, dilutes that influence pool, so you're not so heavily geared in one particular direction.
Yeah.
So as you start accumulating more experience and influences and you play with the craft a little bit more, naturally it'll kind of dilute to where it becomes your own voice instead of too much of one thing.
Yeah. I love when you can hear that in an artist, that thing that makes it them. You're like, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that's cool. Even if it's just like an instrumentation,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Like, so I love Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I can usually tell, like there's a John Prine song where he had Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers as his backing band. And before he even starts singing or anything, you can hear the band. I knew right away. I was like, this is the Heartbreakers, like instantly, which is insane because it's like there's nobody was singing. It was just a band playing. And it was just like so recognizable. And I don't know if it was the keyboard, if it was the drum sound or what, but it was one of those. I'd never heard the song before and I didn't know it was the Heartbreakers going into it. And I listened and I was just like, that's gotta be. Sure enough, it was.
Yeah.
And like, man, that's a testament of a band that has their own sound, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like when somebody can hear it just for a few seconds without words and know who it is.
Yeah. So speaking about songwriting and hearing things without words and such, what aspect of songwriting do you like to focus in on? Is it the lyrics? Is it the melodies? Is it the instrumentation? Is it the textures?
Yeah, I would say I always go melody first.
Okay.
Well, not always. Most of the time. I'll sit down with my guitar and I'll be playing music. And I'll find like a progression I like or something kind of interesting. And then a melody. Well, just do one of those things that people do that they sing nonsense words, and they find the melody and then they kind of fill it in. And sometimes if I'm not paying attention, which is the greatest way to write when you're not paying attention to anything but just like letting it out. Sometimes the first thing that comes out of your mouth is the best opening line ever. You're like, oh, right, this is what I'm trying to write. And then you just try to focus in on that thing that you're doing and not lose that energy that's happening, that's coming through you. Because if you spend too much time trying to figure out how to make this perfect, you can lose it. That's, I think, like doing the editing afterwards when you have the song, that's fine to go back and kind of clean some things up a little bit and tidy it up. But to try to just stay in that moment, even if it means singing the nonsense or getting some of that stuff out. I usually go melody first, and then I start filling it in with the lyrics.
Okay.
But yeah, I big focus on lyrics and trying to get those right. And
it's funny that you mentioned how if you focus too much on something, you'll lose it.
Yeah.
I always viewed it as like you're trying to squeeze water in your hands. If you squeeze too hard, it'll just drain out. So what I used to do is I would, back when I had like a little noodle doodle session, I try to like figure out songs and such, I would be actively recording myself with a live mic somewhere. And I end up with hours of garbage. Plus the 30 seconds to where I'm like, I want to listen to this again. Let me go grab it. I'm so thankful that I had that, that I can refer back.
Yes, it's super important, man. What a nice thing we have that we have phones now. Like
So convenient.
they're such a distraction, but also such a tool like
Yeah.
that we can use for that, right? Like I have just recently realized what I can, when I don't know if you use an iPhone, but I do, and there's modes you can set it in, do not disturb. I have one that I created for songwriting. I just didn't realize I could even do that. I was like, oh, well, this makes things, it silences everything that distracts me and just gives me the voice memos, the notepad, and then like sometimes I'll use a dictionary to make sure like, am I using that word properly?
Right.
Those things. But having be able to record just a little something before you go to bed, like, oh man, I have this idea. I better not lose it overnight. And you hit record and then it's there the next day. I can't tell you how many songs I've lost overnight before I had that.
Same.
And think about before anybody had them. Like, I remember hearing a story, Townes Van Zandt, songwriter from Texas. He used to call this guy, Steve Earle, who was another songwriter from Texas, and he would leave him voicemails or, on his answering machine. If he had something, he'd call and just let it go to the answering machine. I'm going to sing into it. And then he would have that idea if he needed it.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because, you make do with the tools that you have. I feel bad for those that didn't have any recording capabilities. You just have to either just hope your memory is good, share it with friends and hope they remember it well too, or dictate it. But it's a lot less easy then.
Yeah, I think that's why there was a generation that probably read music more. I mean, not probably, they did. They definitely did. And that's probably how you had to record things before you could record them, is knowing how to actually compose music and read music and write it down, so then you can just look at it and play it and know like, oh, that's how that melody went with these lyrics.
Yeah.
Glad I don't have to do that.
I know what you mean. Like I am trained. I could read music. I took band back at like middle and high school and all that stuff. I played the trumpet. But I know very successful bands have been touring for 20 years that can't read music. They just do the thing really well.
Yeah.
They know their chords and chord progressions, but they can't tell you what it looks like on paper.
Yeah, I can't. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I can't. It was a different side of my brain that I didn't. I was a terrible math student, actually kind of a terrible student altogether. And that I don't blame anybody but me. I was just I don't want to be like I wasn't motivated. I was just I guess I just wasn't interested in that as much as I was in playing music and just I liked writing. I loved English class and stuff like that, but math I just couldn't focus. It was like TV static in my brain. If you put a math equation in front of me, all of a sudden it was just like I don't know what I'm looking at here. What do you want me to do with this? Like most people look at it and they can be like, yeah, no problem, I'm solving these math equation. I'm like, hey, man, my brain just turns into TV static when that sits in front of me.
Yeah.
But I think that's what some people's brain turns into with like music.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So we all have our part, that or the role that we play. Turns out mine's not math, and so that reading music was a lot in that side of the brain. I felt like was like there was a lot more mathematical aspect of reading music and writing and rules, which there has to be rules, but
right.
But when you're into rock and roll, no rules. You're a kid.
Yeah.
I remember Michael J. Fox. I watched an interview with him a long time ago, and he was talking about how music to him was interesting because he's like, math, man, 2 + 2 is 4. People already figured that out. Music's, we haven't figured that out yet, so like that's such a teenage approach to it.
Very much so.
But it's also like, that's math, right? Like music is math at the end of the day. But when you're a teenager, it's just loud.
I mean, it's all just the lens in which you view through things. Everyone is wired differently. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. So embrace the things that you're good at. And that's okay.
Yep. Totally.
Yeah. So what started your songwriting journey? What made you wake up one day and be like, you know what, this is the thing I want to do?
Yeah. Well, so I've always written, and at a young age, I liked poetry. Like just rhyming and words and just like having fun with words. That was always something I was interested in. And that was something I did in school a lot, when I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. I was doing a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so I've liked that. And I always felt like I was good at it at a young age. But as far as songwriting goes, I started playing guitar 20 years ago this month. It was actually
cool.
It could have been right now. It was a huge power outage. So where we were at, in Concrete, Washington, a very small town, and we get this time of year, October, November is flood season, storm season, and so the power was out for like 3 or 4 days, out.
Yeah.
And I had a guitar in my closet that I'd never really played, that I'd asked for Christmas when I was in like 4th grade or 5th grade, and I never played it. Yeah. But I was 17 years old, And so I thought, you know what? Power's out. I'm gonna try playing this guitar. And so I started playing it, and I like even the first couple of days I was playing it, I started writing a song. It sucked. I'll tell you what. I didn't know how to play chords, but I was like, okay, I'll play these two strings together.
There you go.
You know, it was just like, but
Power chords.
but it was, yeah, and I wasn't even playing power chords. I was just playing these garbage chords I made up. But man, there's freedom in that because there was no rules, right?
Yeah.
There was nobody telling me how to play the guitar or what my song should be about or any of that stuff. And so that power going out, I'm really thankful for that because I started playing guitar and I never stopped. And then I started writing songs that day.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, it's one of those things that came out of that storm that I'm very thankful for. And so since then, I don't know, it was just something that like I focused on writing songs because it was like what I liked doing. And then it turned out there was people that even liked hearing my songs, even when they sucked. It was weird. I don't get it. But like I remember being in high school and playing at like the proms and the homecomings and the dances and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I had original songs, they sucked. They were really bad, but like people still like supporting, it's like, hey, this is my friend and he comes from our school and he's writing original songs.
Yeah.
And people were still supportive of it. And I don't know, maybe if they would have hated it, maybe I would have just like went to do something else, but I don't think so. I think I would have kept doing it because I liked it so much.
Sure.
But it was sure nice to have the support even when my band really sucked.
I mean, a couple of things on that. Like, one, we all get started somewhere, and that origin is sucking a lot until you suck less. It's not even be good; it's just suck less. But that support that you spoke about, like I found, at least in the circles that I run in, everyone is incredibly supportive, and you may not have the best stuff, but it's yours, and they have a connection to you, and that's the thing that matters. They want to support you.
Yes.
So I'm really glad that you had that experience.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we still support people that are starting whatever their art is, right? And I see bands that are starting up that it just warms my heart to see people in that place where they're first starting because it's so fun. It is like the best feeling ever. Like when I turned 18 and I had an electric guitar in a car, it's like, well, I might as well be the freest person on earth right now. I can do whatever I want. And just like I like seeing that ground floor of people starting to play music, even when you suck. It's like it's the most fun because it's just like the sky is the limit.
Yeah.
You can't suck any more than you already do when you first start.
Exactly. It
And
can't
so
get
it's
worse.
just going to get better as long as you stick with it. There's like nothing you can keep doing where you get worse at it. So
the other thing that I found that is funny is the interpretation of your skills versus what reality says it is. Like, I know there's definitely the cases of where people think that they're better than they are, but most often I find the opposite to be true, to where people are a lot better than they give themselves credit for.
yeah.
So I watched a band called Elephant Crows at Tim's Tavern the other day. I'll actually be interviewing the singer Brandon Eller in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But it was their second show ever, and they were nervous because, it's their second show ever. But I thought it was a phenomenal performance. The guitarist killed it. They were doing really well. Brandon on vocals, excellent voice, phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it's just funny because they're nervous. It's the second show and it's a brand new thing, but they executed at a level that you think they'd be doing this for much longer.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah. And we're hard on ourselves. Everybody is, I mean, I guess not everybody. Some people are not at all. But for the most part, especially, artists, we're hard on ourselves. And maybe that's good to a degree. And maybe it's good sometimes when other people are hard on you to a degree. It's like, how much do you love this? Are you going to do it no matter what?
Yeah.
Being fire tested is good sometimes.
Yes.
But there is that fine line. You still want to be supportive and not discourage somebody from sticking with it.
It's a balance, right? I mean, I think it comes down to the intent. It's like a coach or a parental figure. Like, tough love is a thing, but the love is the important part of that. So there's the balance of, hey, you should really think of these hard questions. I'm trying to challenge you, to push you, but I am supportive.
Well, and there's also like it's a hard thing. So say if somebody sent me their music, right? If they're like, hey, I want your feedback, and they're in like a really hardcore metal band.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, okay, I could give you my feedback, but I'm not a huge hardcore metal guy. And so it almost seems like you shouldn't be listening to my feedback. I'm the last guy you should send. I can try to tell you, but like I would never criticize it. because I'm like, who am I to criticize? I'm not a metalhead. As much as I want to be one, and I think they're rad,
Yeah.
I'm just not one. And so like I would be the wrong guy. So there's sometimes where it's like it's almost better to not even critique at all because it's you just got the wrong guy. I'm not going to tell you how you did working on my car because I don't know how to do that.
I have no
trust you.
expertise in this area.
Yeah, ask somebody that knows that, So yeah, there's a fine line where it's just like, man, don't even say anything because I don't think I would add anything to it.
Sure, fair enough.
Yeah.
If there's any advice that you can give to novice singer-songwriters, or in your case, songwriters-singers, what would you tell them, and what kind of expertise and things would you give their?
Yeah, I think about that a lot actually because it's like as we were getting older, right? And it's not like we're old men, but we're getting older that you start to be the one that is giving advice. And I don't know, I'm like, man, should I even be giving advice to people? Like, who am I to say? Like when, especially to young people, there's that that like if people in their 40s or whatever don't like your music when you're young, you might be doing the right thing. You might be doing it exactly right, right?
Yeah.
But so I guess my thing is always that I always make a point to drive home the observation part of observing the world around you. It's just as important to spend time going out into the world and watching, even if you're not participating, but you're just watching. I like to go on walks after work, and I like to leave my phone at home, and I'll bring a book sometimes, something to find something to blend in. Even if I don't care about the book, I've got the book that I can sit and read and blend in because you can watch. I sit on a bench, and I usually it's in town, and I watch the town. I watch people doing what they're doing, and just looking at people, how they live. I'm going into a bar, sitting at the bar, even if it's a bar I don't like. A lot of times I go into bars I don't like with a lot of people that I don't agree with, but I want to hear what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And I want to think about why they think that way and what could make them come to these conclusions in their life with who they're going to vote for, with what they think about this sports team, with what they think about this political topic or this societal topic. Just trying to listen to get a temperature of that. And then, it's sure I can go to bars I like too, and that's fun, but it's better to go somewhere where you don't fit in or that you're not one of the regulars, because then you can watch, you can observe. If I'm reading a book in a bar, nobody's gonna bother me, but I can still be watching.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important for songwriters or really any artist.
Yeah.
Because that's the world around you and you have to take it in, and then it comes through in your art, whether you know it or not. Sometimes, how you see the world is going to come out in your art. And so that's just a super important thing. I would give that advice to any budding songwriters, to just be paying attention and spend more time paying attention to what's going on around you and less time. And there's going to be people that don't believe this, but a lot of the aspiring artists I see spend a lot of their focus on building a brand and getting the likes and the follows. And I get it, but like spending more time on the art itself is going to do more for you than just getting people to like you on social media.
Yeah.
And there's a fine line because art's got to be in the world or the world's going to suck.
Yeah.
You've got to get it out there and you've got to let the world know it's there. Because I want to know, I want to know when new songwriters that are coming out or when my favorites put out an album. So like you obviously have to promote, and I would never say that people should be no promotion, no ego. It's like we all need to have art in the world.
Yeah.
But there is that fine line between is all you're doing building a brand, or do you have something, do you have art to contribute, or is it just product?
Yeah.
And so that's the hard thing. I think a lot of the young people need to know that you want to make art over product at the end of the day. Well, maybe you don't, maybe you want to make money.
Yeah.
And that's fine too. It's just a different thing. And then I don't have advice, because if it's about making money, I have no advice, because I don't make any money off of music. I mean, hardly any,
Sure.
No, I'm not making a living off of making music. And so that's awesome. Not making a living at music is like the best, because then you could do it because you love it.
Exactly.
And then you can do whatever you want with it. You can say anything you want, and people don't have to like it, and they don't have to buy it because they're not buying it anyway.
Yeah. It could just be pure passion.
Yeah. And music really doesn't sell anyway. Like, as far as like, people aren't buying albums. They might buy vinyl.
Right.
But like, nobody's buying CDs. and you're not going to get any money from streaming. Bandcamp is great, but most people aren't going to buy it there anyway, and that's just the reality of it. It sucks. I think that it's cool to support the artist in that way, and I wish that more people like that, but that's just not the way she goes,
Yeah, it's just not how music is generated.
Yeah,
always touring and tickets and merch sales and that kind of stuff.
At this point, if you're going to be a musician, you got to really like it. It's like, it's not like the 1950s where you could just be like, okay, you're an attractive person and you can carry a tune. You're going to make somebody a lot of money, and you're going to make you a little bit of money, but it's going to be more than you have now. And we're going to use you to tour and then send you down the road. Like, it's not the same. Once record companies stop selling records, there's not as much of a drive to go find people and put them out there. You got to do a lot of it yourself. It can be done, and I don't know even how it's done now.
I don't know. I know for like the common person, at least like the ability to publish your own music and distribute it, that's been largely democratized by like, SoundCloud and Bandcamp and YouTube and Spotify and blah, blah, blahs.
Yeah.
But I have no idea how the upper echelon of music works anymore.
Yeah. I don't even know how the middle, like I know getting the music out, but like when I see touring bands that I like, a lot of my favorite bands come to the clubs, right? They'll go to the small in Ballard or wherever, and in Seattle and the show boxes of the world or the whatever. I wonder, like, how is it you get to that level these days even? And I'm not saying if it's an old artist that's been around forever, because they've already got a fan base built in from when you could sell records. I'm saying like new bands that are starting off that are touring those places. I wonder.
have no idea.
I don't either. Like, what's going on there? And maybe it is that they are doing that work and putting in all that promotion, which is not pretty work. It's not maybe what they want to do. But I don't know, because that's usually not what brings me out to the show. It's usually the music that brings me to the show, and it's not the promotion on social media that brings me out. As a matter of fact, it's usually the promotion that annoys me. That's usually how I end up muting people. It's like, I've heard too much, man, and not enough music.
Okay.
And so I'm a bit of I guess I'm grouchy a little bit with that.
We're all getting grouchy.
And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to be passionate and a little bit grouchy about something. I just have to make sure to remember to still also be polite and understand that some people are just doing things differently than I'm doing, and I have to I have to understand that.
Yeah.
And that some people are trying to make a living because some people aren't fortunate enough to do a job that they love.
Also true.
And I'm fortunate enough that I have a job that I love. And so I think that I could probably do a better job of just being understanding.
I mean, I think you're doing pretty well as is. Just from your statement from before of like, go sit in a place that's unfamiliar and just be aware and listen to conversation so you understand how other parts of the world exist. Yeah. That statement alone already tells me how much awareness that you have.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Well, I'm glad that it comes across that way, because I never want to come across as a jerk. And I know sometimes I get that way with like, my opinions on self-promotion.
Yeah.
I just I'm somebody who appreciates just real art, and knowing that like, oh man, that's what makes that person that person. Yeah. Instead of like everybody looking the same, like, that's another thing I would say to aspiring artists. Like, it's good to look at the people that you admire and see what they do. But if you're doing exactly what they do, everybody's doing that. I see a lot of people that are doing the exact same thing, using the exact same words, the exact same clothes, the exact same look. And I'm just like, man, that's going to look exactly the same. I've always thought like, if you see the whole crowd running one way, everybody's running one direction, and then there's one guy that runs this way, who's going to stand out? Yeah. That one person that's running the opposite direction, even if it's crazy the direction they're running in, it's towards fire or floods or whatever, killer bees. It's like, man, wonder what that dude's doing. I'm going to find out. Yeah. I want to know more about the guy that's running that way, or the gal that's running that way, or whoever's running that way. I think that that's important to run the other direction sometimes.
No, I think that's hugely important, because if you do what everyone else does, you're going to get what everyone else has. And I don't know about you, I don't want that. I want to, get something different, which means by definition, I'm going to have to do something weird or odd or, unconventional in order to get that. Yeah, I think that you're, that's why I like having this cat right here. And I like having the dog. It's like, that's a really good part of it. It's very natural. It's a real part of this podcast, right? It's a part of who you are. And I think that there's some people that might not, they want it to be professional, no cats. And I think this is just as professional as anything, because first of all, cats rule. And so do dogs. I like dogs too. But
having those things that are unique, like this is a unique thing, and I think that that's great. So that's if you need any creative criticism, that I say keep the cats, keep the dogs, unless somebody's allergic, of course.
Yeah.
And then still keep them, and let's just watch them sweat.
They'll deal.
You'll get more views. Somebody's just having a,
But no,
anaphylactic
I've
shock.
intentionally had them around because one, like I try to come across as authentic and as genuine as I possibly can. And this is an aspect of my life, and I'm happy to display it. And they've made an appearance on, I think, every single episode that I've done so far in some capacity.
I personally, if I make any kind of videos for promoting shows and stuff on my social media, there's almost always my cat jumping in there, and that's natural.
There you go.
It's not like I'm telling him to. It's just natural. But I like that because it's a real look, and people look at that and they go, "Hey, that's real life. That's not just something that has been curated for me or just been doctored up." So I think that's great. Now we talked about him, he left.
Yeah. So speaking of curating and doctoring and genuineness, when people go about songwriting, what do you think is the balance of like saying what you really feel versus, tailoring it to make it a little bit more palatable to an audience? I imagine there's a balance somewhere, but I also imagine that line is different for each person.
Yeah, I think it is different for each person because there's some people, they're artists that are truly like out there. Like I take like Frank Zappa, right? Like,
okay.
So I haven't listened to a ton of his stuff. A lot of his stuff's really out there, and I got the feeling that like he's not running this through some filter. Like, how can we make this palatable for the world? He's just like, no, this is what the world's getting.
Send it.
You like exactly, and some people just send it.
Yeah,
that's cool too. And so I think that like there are some people that really craft their songs. Jason Isbell, I'm a fan of his music. As far as like modern songwriters go, and he really, I watched the documentary about him, and he really spends time crafting every word. And me personally, I spend time crafting the songs so that I like them when they're done, and I don't much think about the audience, really. And I've noticed the times I've thought about the audience, I didn't really care for the song afterward.
Sure.
So personally, I've just always put the audience last, or not even at all. Just like the people that like your music will find it, or your music will find them, and I believe that.
I believe that too.
And sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes artists die, and you don't even hear about them until they're dead, and we don't appreciate them.
I know that happen a lot.
Yeah. It's just like we don't even appreciate them till they're gone. But that's cool too, because it's like it's probably not cool for them in the time when they're struggling,
right? And
nobody knows them, and they're like, "Man, I'm killing it. I'm putting in the work, and it's just not happening for me." And that happens, but that's real life because people maybe discover it later.
Yeah,
and that's still contributing to the world. And that's contributing to the world forever, which is really cool. Music's a weird thing. It's not like a painting, Yeah. A painting can burn in a fire. But a song is like, once it's out there, I mean, sure, I guess you could lose the master recording, but even then, if enough people know it, it lives in people's brains, where it's like a painting can maybe live in your brain, but I wouldn't be able to see it exactly.
Yeah.
And that's just an interesting form of art. I know I've probably gotten off topic for what you asked, but...
to kind of go off what you said, I think it's both terrifying and fantastic that we're past the point in time where things can disappear. Everything is archived more or less nowadays. So like if I wanted to find some obscure song, I say obscure, but let's say it was written in the 2000s. And I'm trying to find this thing in 2040. I'm going to be able to find it.
You are going to find it. Somebody's got it somewhere.
Yeah.
And you're right. That is great. And also a little bit scary.
Medium terrifying.
Like,
but
man, I wish that live recording wasn't out, that people could hear it. But so I'm a big Neil Young fan, which is why I brought him up earlier, because he's an influence of mine. And a proud influence of mine. And I just like that I can trust that Neil will always put out what Neil wants. And it's not always good. A lot of times it is just like, okay, well, Neil was going through the thing and he wanted this to come out, and it doesn't mean it's great, but I can trust in his, his creative control, that he has full control of what comes out.
Yeah.
And he's a believer in, hey, if I recorded it and it sucked, it's coming out, and the world needs to hear that that's what real artists sound like.
I think that's great.
And that that's not always good. I'm not going to only give you my best stuff and pretend that I never did anything that was just so-so or garbage or out of tune or out of time.
Yeah.
So So there's a few schools of thought, and I think I go more towards like, hey, look, if there's recordings of it and it's bad and they're out there, they're out there. Like, look at the one that you first saw me, right? It was a live one, and it's a long time ago. And I'm not saying it was a bad recording, but
I
it's
thought it
probably
was
not.
great.
Yeah, right. And so that's it. That's once it's out there, it's not really for me to say.
Yeah.
You know, if it means something to somebody else, that's great. I'm not gonna like take it down. There's been times where I've had things taken down and asked for them to be taken down. For the purpose of like, hey, we're trying to get some gigs right now.
Gotcha.
And those aren't representative, because sometimes live videos, they sound great live, but they don't sound good when you get them on video.
Oh, absolutely.
And so
100%.
somebody that's going to book a band like, oof, they just sound like, garbage.
Yeah.
And so, there's been times where I'm like, hey, can we make those private? Because those are older videos. And,
Yeah.
but I don't want them to be completely erased from history.
Mm-hmm.
I think that once you kind of get over a hump of like, okay, I'm fine now, I can play some shows, and I think I can book these shows. But when you're first starting out, like, it was kind of a little bit sketchy.
It's actually really funny that you mentioned about like the quality of recordings for bands. So I work with a group called Sessions in Place, and over the pandemic, before I joined, they won an Emmy for live stream concerts. And their whole thing was to, give artists a high quality, quite literally an Emmy level production, so that they can promote themselves. Because for too long, they noticed that bands, it's usually some shitty phone camera. The audio is like just drums. And it's like
no
from
bass,
30 feet away, and like 5 people across.
So it's doing the
in front
opposite of helping them. It's actually making it worse.
Exactly.
That's
because
cool.
the band is great. They're just not represented in the best way.
Agreed. And that's huge. That's why people can record whatever they want on the shows and put it on YouTube. That's fine.
Right.
But like, I try not to put them out myself on our pages and stuff like just because like it's not a accurate representation.
Yeah.
And you don't want to scare people off. But then again, who cares?
It is what it is.
It's they're gonna find it if they're gonna find it. So,
but I really like the statement that you said of, you put the art that you enjoy out into the world, and if you do this enough times for long enough, the people that like your stuff will gravitate towards you. They will find you eventually. I imagine there's something really rewarding once you get to that point.
Yeah, I'm a slow mover in a lot of aspects, and I like a slow climb. I like doing it at my pace. I don't like rushing into things, in most aspects of my life. I move frustratingly slow for a lot of people in my life, I'm sure, and people in my past that is just like, man, this guy, it's not that I'm being non-committal. It's just that like, I like to take my time.
Yeah.
Like in relationships, I think it's great when people, and it's not always that it happens this way, but slow moving in a relationship, when you meet somebody and you get to know them and you go on dates with that person.
Yeah.
And then maybe you move in, or whatever, and then maybe you get married. But some people just rush right in, right? And that's like, totally. And I'm a slow mover. I like to enjoy things along the way, and it makes for such a strong foundation when you move slow and you take your time. Yeah, and that's the same with an audience, right? Like, it's just like, if you build your audience over time, it's going to be people that truly love what you have to say, and they're going to stick with you no matter what it is you're doing, because they're interested.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I am as a fan of Neil Young or Willie Nelson or John Prine or whoever it was that were songwriters that I admired. It's just like, I'm always going to be interested in what they have to say.
Yeah.
Even if it's not my favorite.
Yeah.
I'm a loyal fan because they've let me know I can trust that they're not doing this for my money, or they're not trying to sell me something just, to make money doing the pop thing or whatever. And I don't even want to talk bad about pop, because that has its place too. And making a good pop song is really hard to do and really cool when somebody can do it. Like, man, there's some songs that are just so undeniably good. You're like, man, that is a great pop song. Don't know how they did it. Kudos, even if you don't like the artist of the song, you gotta respect a well-made pop song.
Yeah, but I think like you said, it comes down to the authenticity and the genuineness. You're not trying to make a quick buck off of your audience. Like, you're really trying to say, this is my craft, please enjoy it.
Yeah, totally. Or you don't even have to enjoy it. That's cool too, like, that's okay. That's okay too, to not have everybody like you.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you'll still meet people that you never would have met. That's the biggest thing. I remember playing, one time I was playing at a winery, and I was up on this hill. It was in Chelan, and this was probably 2016 or 17 with my band Whiskey Fever, and we were playing at this winery, overlooking the river, and there was all these people, just, wine people, and they're dancing. I'm like, man, they're not going to like us at all, but they have money and they're like going to pay for this trip we're on. So whatever, we'll make this stop and we'll play there. And so we were playing a lot of covers, stuff that's not as fun to do. It's totally a payment gig, like this is to pay for our hotel rooms, our gas and whatnot. But I was just looking around at the river behind us and all these people and thinking like, man, I'm really glad I started playing music, because it's not like I'm, on some awesome tour, not famous, but all these people I've met in these weird like places that it's taken me to that I would have never gone to, that like weird towns, weird shows, just like weird little venues, trips with your buddies, meeting other musicians. It's like music. I try to make my whole life is built around music. If I'm at work, what I do is I'm cutting wood for guitars, and I'm not building them, but I'm cutting wood for somebody else who's building them. And I can hang my hat on knowing that like, man, that's a cool thing I'm doing. And then all day at work, I'm listening to music. And then when I get off work, I'm writing music and I'm playing music. And on the weekends, I'm playing music with my friends. On Thursday nights, I'm doing a radio show where I'm talking about music. It's like, I just like, it's one of those things that you can't overdose on.
Yeah.
Like water's good for you, but if you drink too much, it will kill you. Right. And food is the same way. If you eat too much, it'll kill you. But like nothing, I don't think anything happens if you listen to too much music. I've tried, trust me, I've tried. I'm like, I've got to find the line. When is it going to be bad for me? And it's just like, there's still so much new music and old music that I haven't heard that I want to hear at all. And so I think it's a really cool thing, and it's, makes for a more fulfilling life.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Art, just in whatever your art is, it just like, it makes people happier when they find that thing that it is that they do. My stepdad, he's started working like with wood, like carving and doing some cool things with wood. And that's his artistic outlet. And I think that's like really awesome, because he's retired now and that's what he's putting his energy into. And those are things that he's leaving behind and that he can offer the world. And like everybody has that. Not everybody knows what it is yet, but it's important to keep trying things until you find that, because it will make your life so much more fulfilled. And I think the key is you want to satisfy your soul at the end of the day, and that will make you happy. And so no matter what I've done for work, I've had some pretty crappy jobs, like a lot of them. And it's made me appreciate the job I have now. And two, it's made me realize how important music was, because no matter what I did, if I was working minimum wage at Target, I felt like I was still a success because I was making music.
Yeah.
Like I was still leaving something, my mark on the world. And that made me feel like I'm successful, and it had nothing to do with what I did for a living.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important.
I think that's huge. I mean, I view life as a happiness over time curve, right? It's not money over time, although they're fairly closely related, but it's definitely happiness over time.
Yes.
So when you can find the thing that gives you life and fulfillment and, scratches that itch for passion, that's huge.
Yeah, and understanding the role you play in the world. Sometimes people get in their head about things and they forget to see like what it is they're actually doing, and how, some people might not realize how important they are and to other people and to the world around them, So sometimes getting out of your head and stop listening to the negative voice, there's a line there too, right? You want to be a good critic of your music and your quality control and whatnot, but like also know that sometimes you're hard on yourself.
Yeah.
And it's okay to, go a little bit easier on yourself. I know I probably could sometimes.
I'm sure we all can.
Yeah.
So speaking of those like personal moments, is there like a quiet moment that you can share in your songwriting journey? And what I mean is like I view the big moments as like, hey, I'm on stage and I played in front of this crowd of 500 people. Ooh. Yeah. But I'm thinking of the quiet moments, like, it's 2:30 in the morning. I'm sitting at my desk. There's a single light on. I have a cup of coffee or I have a cup of tea, and I just wrote this really cool lyric.
Yeah.
Do you have any of those small moments?
Yeah. Well, I love the small moments. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
So something I like to do in any house I've lived in is I take my guitar and I wander around the house when you're alone, right?
Okay.
And there's parts of the house that inspire you differently. There's a part in my stairwell that's got an echo to it.
Okay.
That is like, it's not good for every song, but if I sit on this one stair and I point my guitar at one wall, it bounces the way. So there's this spot in my house that I can sit and write songs and I can sing, and my voice will carry better with the natural reverberation. But then there's also this spot that's in my kitchen that I like, or right in front of my fridge, where I'll stand in front of my fridge and play my guitar. So there's little spots in the house that I like to write from, and they're all a little bit different.
Okay.
And so that's something that's a more of a quiet moment.
Yeah.
And I'm for sure like, I don't like to write when there's other people around. I've never co-written with somebody. And it's not that I
I
don't
haven't
want
either.
to. It's just I don't know. That doesn't seem like how I write. I need to do it more because it is an exercise that's probably worth trying out before
Mhm.
I say that I can't do it. I just haven't done it yet.
Sure.
But I like drinking coffee and writing. I do like writing in the morning.
Okay.
I like writing on Friday mornings. That's my I work Monday through Thursday. So Friday morning's like my, the whole weekend's ahead of me. It's that great feeling of just like, man, the whole weekend's gonna last forever, and I can sit and write and enjoy my coffee in this time. And I live alone, and which I think that's helpful also, because then when a song hits you, you can just start writing.
Yeah.
When I didn't live alone, it was harder because there was a little window that was like, I have this much time to write, and then I've got to be either done with it or hopefully I can get back into that headspace when I get back to it. But yeah, as far as like the quiet moments, I just really like finding different places to write and the way that the sounds, like I really like going into baseball dugouts.
Okay.
Like if you go to the nice thing I love about baseball diamonds and dugouts is like every town has them, small or big, and they're like a park you can count on that you don't usually have to pay to go to or park. And so like you can always count on there's this patch of grass. And sometimes if you're lucky, there's a real dugout that goes into the ground and they have the cinder blocks for the bricks or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's a cool sound that comes out of dugouts when you're sitting on those benches in there. And so like I love going to the baseball dugouts. I like to just like even go there to eat food, just sit in the bleachers and eat, get takeout or whatever, and then bring my guitar and write in this place where there's just this park around you.
Yeah.
And they're the same in every town. Plus it's like it's this little piece of America, right? That there's baseball diamonds still. And it's like it's one of those old sports that maybe people don't love as much as they used to, but man, even the abandoned baseball parks, they're inspiring because there's just like they're dirt and you can see that like they're overgrown, the bases are overgrown, maybe there's a tree growing in the left field or something, but you can just see this little thing that used to be. I find a lot of inspiration from that.
Yeah.
And I like going to see people's baseball fields in small towns all over, It's fun to see.
I mean, that's a beautiful thing. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
But yeah, baseball used to be the national pastime.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's echoes of that all throughout this country, like
Totally.
you said.
Man, it's like a thing that the way we talk, a lot of people don't even realize how much baseball has worked its way into, man, that was a home run. You hit it out of the park.
A strike.
Yeah, it's a strike. Yeah, you got 3 strikes, you're out,
Yeah.
Like they use that in the court system to send people to death row. They're using baseball lingo, which is insane. But it's a great, I use it a lot in my writing. So I have an album called Ocean of Trouble, and there's a lot of songs that have baseball metaphors in them, but they're just like, they're so perfect and they're so ubiquitous, and so many people, you just, know what you're talking about, like I threw that guy a curveball, like that, somebody could say, let me throw you a curveball here with a question, and you know exactly what they're talking about, even if you don't like baseball, you know, it's something that unites us.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's a little bit more romantic of the sports, I think.
I mean, it was, like you said, so pervasive through culture. There is a romance to that. It was a time and a place and an era.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. So you touched upon this briefly before, but what are some of the topics that you like to write about? You mentioned, the small town feel on the album that you have coming up, that angsty period. You mentioned, some of the inspirations that you have of sitting in a bar, just kind of observing and taking things. You mentioned some relationships, but what are some of the common themes that you like to pull upon? What do you find yourself gravitating towards?
Yeah, well, like I was saying about the new album, it's definitely more small town living, and I've lived in a small town almost my whole life. There was a couple years that I moved away to Portland and then Spokane for a little bit, but for the most part, I write from a small community perspective. And so I do like storytelling, and a lot of times I like characters in a song, right, that aren't me. And I had a song about a girl at the post office. It's called Postal. And it's a silly song, it's a little love song, and it's fictional. It's purely fictional,
Yeah.
But and maybe that takes away from it when I, if I'm talking about it and somebody's listening, I'm like, oh man, I thought you really were in love with that girl from the post office. You've ruined my, illusion in my head. And so sometimes I don't talk too much about what a song's about unless somebody will ask. I'm like, do you really want to know? Because you might leave this conversation.
Changed.
Yeah, upset that that song was fictional, you know, but I like writing about, I like telling stories, I guess. And so I'll make up silly characters, and I use a lot of humor in most of my music. Yeah, that's part of that thing that makes it mine, I guess, is my sense of humor. You know, everybody's got a sense of humor. Comedians, you can tell their style and their sense of humor. And so I put a lot of humor in mine with a lot of serious things, kind of like, you know, that song, Build Me Up, Buttercup. Why do you build me up, buttercup, baby, just to let me down? It sounds happy, but it's sad.
It's very
right?
sad.
And so like I kind of like that. And you know, if you put humor in, just like we were talking about with serious things, you can kind of slide it past the goalie, right? Like okay, so you have to deal with this. Like it's funny, but it's also like, oh wait, oof, that's uncomfortable. So I like to write from that spot. Also, I like to write about things that are maybe I don't want to say uncomfortable to hear about, but you know, I swear in my music all the time. I just use cuss words all the time, but that's how I talk all the time too. Maybe not right now, but like that's how I would be talking if I was hanging out with my band. We would just talk naturally, so I write naturally, and I think that's important. And I never want to be hurtful, you know. I don't use hate speech and stuff like that. But I as far as just like curse words are silly.
They are
like we've
silly.
given them so much power.
Yeah.
And that was a different generation that did. I think that we're doing a lot to fix that and realize that the words we shouldn't be saying are a lot of the ones that
the
used to be allowed.
derogatory ones.
Yeah,
right?
and it's funny, I've noticed, like, you know, when you are young, your parents or teachers or whoever, and they tell you the words you can't say. And then as you get older, you cross that line where you start telling your parents, like, look, you can't say that anymore. Like, those are not allowed. Those words, turns out the ones you told me I can't say, totally fine.
Totally fine.
The ones you have been saying and that
Not
grandma
real.
says or whoever says, and I'm not saying you, grandma, if you're watching, but you know, there's words you're like, oh, yeah, we just don't use that one anymore. It's just funny though. You cross that line, and I think that that's just life. I think that's how it's always been, but it's just that we have more documentation now, so we can look and see recordings of people, you know, and versus, you know, before there was recording technology, we might not know exactly how people talked, but yes, I think when I hear an artist that cusses right out of the gate, I'm like, okay, so you've made a choice to write however you want. It's like, it's one of those things as an indicator, and I don't say all songs have to sound like that because I love it when they don't. But when somebody does that, I'm like, okay, they're not playing by the guidelines that are set to make sure that you're going to be on the radio or safe for, you know.
Yeah, X, Y, and Z, the large populace.
Yeah. I don't want to say like I'm super anti-censorship, you know. I think there's a line, of course, but I do a radio program and I flirt with that line. And I just like, you know, I just want somebody to have a solid argument on why I'm not supposed to say those words.
Yeah.
And it has to be better than mine, you know, and then it'll change my opinion. But for now, it's just like, we don't say those words because we don't like those vibrations. The way that word vibrates, you can say shit, you can say poop, and one's acceptable, but they mean the exact same thing. It's just like, oh, I don't like the way this word sounds when it comes out of your mouth. And it's like, who are you to decide? You know? So like, that's old.
Monty
doesn't
really
mind.
wants your attention.
Yeah, Monty doesn't mind either word.
He's like, yeah, just pet
he's
me,
like,
it's
I'm
fine.
a dog. I don't care about it. That's a human problem that you guys have put power into.
Yeah,
And
you
you've
guys
decided to
made
make
up your own problems.
Yeah, you've made these rules that you have to live in, and Monty doesn't have to live in that world at all. And that's why animals are better.
If I could be a dog in a middle class family, my God, how easy of a life that would be.
Yeah, man, I'll tell you what. I was in Nicaragua a couple years ago, and it was like January of 2020, before COVID was like. I was just hearing about it while I was down there, and I was like, this will blow over. It's just nothing. But man, being a dog down there, they're running wild, dude. Those dogs are everywhere, and they're stray dogs. So there's also a part of me that's like, if I'm going to be a dog, I'd like to be one of those stray dogs too, because they're running around, barking at things.
The freedom of stuff.
Just going through trash and having a great time in packs of dogs. Maybe they're not having a great time, but
at least on the surface, it looks like they're having a good time.
I remember I was there and observing also the world, you know, that was down there, and seeing every night there's fires on the street, people burning their garbage, right? They're just burning their trash out there, and people go, there's no speed limit. You can go as fast as you want and fill up the back of your truck with like 10 dudes and go 80 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour past all these garbage fires. There's kids riding motorcycles with their buddies, and
it's a very different.
They're drinking beers on the street, and dogs are running wild. And I text my buddy all this, and he goes, And can you believe that we have the gall to call ourselves the land of the free? And I was like, yeah, man, these people are free down here and they're happier. Like it's weird to see people that are growing up in that kind of environment where they're poor and they don't have a lot, but how much happier they are. Like I watched families at the end of the night, like they finished dinner and then they moved the tables and everybody was dancing.
Yeah.
Like that's like
There's so much more life.
and there were smiles and like their whole day goes into just like working for the family, right? Like washing the clothes at the creek, food, preparing the food, growing your own food. And like the smiles on their faces and it's just like, yeah, we're the land of the free on paper here, but man, I don't know. I just like I left there thinking maybe we're doing something wrong here. Maybe like actually a simpler life is a happier life. Of course, that's not the case for everybody.
Right. It definitely, there's a
there's
balance of challenges and such.
Totally. If it's not like nobody's having fun being hungry,
Mhm.
or not knowing where the money's going to come from for rent. That's not fun. You
Yep.
know, I get that. But I do think that there's a lot of things that we don't realize that we don't need, to make us happy, or that we think we need all this stuff to make us happy.
Yeah. I mean, as I've gotten older and hopefully wiser, I've come to realize that, like the close connections that you have with friends and people just in general, the genuine and authentic connections that you have with them, it is so much more nourishing and satisfying than, material possessions and such.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because it feels cliche, at least for me, like this was just a message that's been drilled into my head constantly since I was a child.
Yeah.
But there's so much truth to it. And I feel like it takes a personal journey to discover that and realize that truth before you can accept it.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. And I think that just knowing that the material thing, like there's some things you need, to get by. I mean, having a roof over your head, obviously you need those things.
Yeah.
But like in my fantasies, I always have less stuff. I found that, and it was something I discovered like more recently, that man, everything I daydream about, I'm living in a sailboat, which I don't want to do, by the way. I know that that's ridiculous, but I still fantasize about like, man, I would have the sea, I would have nothing, I would just have like maybe one guitar, and I'd have this little room, and then I could just go see the world, which that sounds like...
It's very romantic.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I'm never going to be into sailing because first of all, it takes a lot of money and know-how, and like you have to be a good mechanic and like fixing things. I have no desire for that. But I mean, also I have the fantasy of just like, living in a trailer, right? Like I think that like that's like this small little place that it does what it's supposed to do, and you can create there or whatever and keep to yourself, or I've always thought about the like, I don't want to say this is my ideal happiness, but there's that scene in the beginning of the first Lethal Weapon movie where Mel Gibson's laying naked and he's got an ashtray on his chest and he's smoking cigarettes in his little camper on the beach. He's watching TV, and in the movie he's miserable. I think he puts a gun in his mouth like moments later because he's just so depressed. But I thought, man, this guy doesn't know how good he has it.
So
he's living on the
romantic.
beach
You're like,
in a trailer, watching TV, smoking cigarettes in bed. And I think that's cool. And I've always thought that like that he had nothing, and that seemed awesome. Versus like seeing the billionaires, I'm like, I have no interest in it. Like maybe that's just because I know that's never gonna happen. But like also just like, I don't need those cars, don't need that house. I just want a little something.
Okay.
So I think that that's kind of a cool thing as I'm getting older, to be in touch with what I do want and what I don't want. And so that helps me steer myself, I guess, in that direction of like, okay, well, it doesn't take much to have less.
Yeah. Do you think that spirit of less is more is reflected in your music as well?
Yeah.
Simpler melodies, simpler textures and rhythms.
Totally. I don't even know if I've ever thought about that, but you're absolutely right. Because I do have a very simplistic like approach, and by design almost, like I was saying, I learned enough chords to write, right? And so like I'm not getting too technical, and I'm using a language that is easy for everyone to understand. It's not like too many things are hidden behind big words or metaphors. There's a lot of things that are just direct.
Yeah.
And it's accessible, but it's real. And so I do think that, there isn't a simplistic approach to mine. And the things that the songs and albums that I haven't really liked were when those songs became bigger and more polished, and they didn't seem like the song I wrote it to begin with. I always like my demos. I always like the ones I record with my iPhone.
Yeah.
I hit record and I listen to them and I'm like, man, this sounds exactly how I felt when I recorded it. And they actually kind of sound good now.
I mean, there's a
Like,
rawness to that.
yeah,
It's
and
great.
like they've
Yeah.
come a long way with the phone. Like they have some kind of natural compression on them or something that it's just like,
Yes. Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
like you can actually get by sending that song to somebody and they can listen to it and really like, oh, I love that song. And so many times I make the mistake of sending those demos to people and they fall in love with the demo and then they hear the studio and they're like, I liked your demo better. It was more real. It was more raw. I could connect. Like, yeah, I thought that might happen. I was afraid of that.
So funny how that works. So I'm a photographer, videographer by trade, and film is making a huge comeback. People want that graininess. They want that film analog look.
It's so cool.
Because I don't know if it's so much of like a romance and an aesthetic and a time period, but like it is something that, they don't want the polish.
Yeah.
They want the rawness, the
Yeah.
genuineness of that.
Yeah, there's only so much polish we can take, I think.
Yeah.
Right? Like before we just want something that's like not so much focusing on the polish as it is to what they're actually filming or recording, right? Like video games, like no matter how good the graphics can be, I'm like, man, this video game, it's not that fun. It's just like really great graphics, but I'm
Yeah,
like,
it's
man,
beautiful, but
like I can
boring.
still play Super Mario Brothers 1 and have a blast because it's a great game,
It's funny that you mentioned that rawness. So I listen to a decent amount of metal music. And
Yeah,
there's a band
yeah.
called Spirit Box. So they have a song called Circle With Me.
Yeah.
And the first time I heard it, I listened to a one-take live by Courtney LaPlante, the lead singer.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. Just genuine, raw, vulnerable, beautiful.
Yeah.
And then I heard the studio version. I'm like, it's less.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
like it.
yeah.
It's polished and it sounds good, but it's missing that edge to it, the rawness in the throat and the vocals. It wasn't the same, and I vastly prefer the live version more.
Yeah. Live versions and demos are almost always, I don't want to say always my favorite, but
Yeah.
they're real. They're so real, and there's just no like, okay, this was the one take, this is the one I did, and this is the one you get. It's not like, let's keep doing this until it's exactly perfect and exactly in time, and there's no way to speed up or slow down. When you play live, you can speed up and slow down as the song needs it to.
Yep.
And oftentimes it's speed up. It's like, whoa, that was way too fast. What were we thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing that I struggle with, honestly, to this day as a musician, managing time signatures and all of that stuff. Because when I perform live, like it's usually me and a guitar, I get to control the tempo as much as I want. Speed up, slow down, have it be irregular. It's fine because I control. So when I actually started to record these things and set it to a click track and actually like produce it and have high quality, I just had so much trouble.
Yeah, it's hard. Click tracks are a weird thing that like when I first heard one, I was like, uh-oh, it's gonna be a problem. But then I got good at used to it and I can do it, but it's still not the same. It's just not the way that the music I make is captured the best that it can be, I guess.
Yeah, so speaking of the music that you make, I've been listening to yourself on repeat for the past couple of days. Some of the ones that I love, we chatted earlier, is Mice in the Walls and Feather. There's such a soulfulness that you have to both your voice but your style of writing. Like we talked about earlier in this show, like it feels genuine, small towny, very easy to understand concepts, very simple language, but there's a beauty to that. There's a simplicity to that, that at least in Mice on the Walls, like I really gravitated towards that in the story that you told.
Yeah, that was I wrote that when I was 21 years old. I'm 37 now, so I wrote that when I had first met, well, she's my ex-wife now, but she was, I first met, and her parents own a brewery in the town that I grew up in. And it was just like, it was kind of we were in the honeymoon phase.
I can tell.
And so that was the song I wrote then, and I still like the song. I still look back at it, and it's like I'm writing different stuff now, but I still can always love those songs. And there's a lot of people that still connect to those older songs and maybe don't like the newer ones, and that's totally cool too.
I mean, I listen to John Denver. I like that too.
And it's funny, like there's a lot of different styles of my music, and like the stuff that usually people know or gravitate to is more of the slow, I don't know, I guess maybe not slow, but more emotional, more vulnerable. That's the word, vulnerable. And that's cool too, because then I've got some songs that are more rock and roll heavy, a little bit more goofy, silly. People like those too. But those are all parts of me, like whether people like them or not, they're still coming out, right?
Yeah.
And I'm still going to embrace all of those sides. Silly, not taking things seriously, or taking things seriously, being sad.
Yeah.
Because like man, you're wasting the gift if you don't.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I feel bad for the people that can't go home and play the guitar and sing their blues away, right? Because like that's the thing as an artist I can do. Like when I have a bad day, I can just come home and lay it on my guitar. And there's some people that don't have that, and I think that it makes it hard for them to have an outlet to let go of the anger. Right?
Yeah.
That's why some angry people. I feel like most of the angry people in this world who are just filled with hate, they probably just never figured out what their outlet was.
Yeah, they
You
just
know?
bottled that up for about 40 years, and they're one bad
Or maybe they
conversation
did
from
figure out the
exploding.
outlet, and there was nobody that was supportive of it, and they just felt like they were doing the wrong thing, and so they were vulnerable, and they did this thing, and then the world just shit on them, and then they didn't want to do it anymore.
Yep.
I don't know. I feel for angry people too, because I know that like there's a reason they're angry. Even if I don't agree with them on this, a lot of them I don't, you know, but I'm still like, man, who hurt you?
No, but really, like,
Yeah,
who hurt
like
you?
it's
Yeah,
okay. It's okay to just like to accept that, you know, you can change and find that thing that satisfies you.
Yeah.
And it's important. I think that getting the word out on that, like, hey, everybody's got that thing, just figure it out and like try new things, you know? Try pottery. If you suck at pottery, that's not it. You know, and maybe if like even if you suck at it, but you can feel like, oh, I like this, then that's probably it. Like you're gonna get better at it if you like doing it, you know? Whatever it is.
Speaking to the emotion of things, do you find that in your discography? At least, so let me take one more step back.
Yeah.
I've chatted with a number of musicians who kind of view their discography and the songs that they write as chapters of their life.
Yeah.
Like they can look at this album and be like, oh yeah, I just went through a breakup and that's where these 7 songs came from. And I was feeling this, this, and this. But it was so funny because 2 years later, I had this album and I'm able to reflect on the things I was feeling in the first album. And that's how this album came out.
Yeah.
So do you
Yeah.
have that experience with the things that you've wrote too? Chapters of your life?
Yeah, totally. I used to just record demos on an 8-track recorder right at home. That's all I did. Most of my songs, I have more music that way, you know, hundreds of them. And they were little albums that I never released to people. I mean, I gave them out in little
Sure.
CDs or whatever, but like, and they're not online anywhere really. And those were just little photo albums of my life, chapters of my life. And I'd label the albums and I'd have them like, and I'd know when they were done too.
Yeah.
And looking back, like, it is hard for me to look back at some of them and be like, boy, I didn't know how to sing yet. Like, I'm not even saying I know exactly how to sing now, but at least I have like some, obviously, like, that's it. You just get better. And so it's harder. But there's still some stuff there that I'm proud of, right? That I'm like, man, I'm proud that I was able to just like get those feelings out.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, totally. I do look at them as chapters of my life, and I do like albums more so than doing singles, which I get people like doing, you know, single songs, and that's cool, and I'm totally, you know, for that.
Mm-hmm.
But personally, I do like having albums that represent a chapter.
Okay.
And I remember, this is not a good story for me as far as like it doesn't paint me in a good light, but it's the truth. It was when I was in high school and I had a music teacher, and I've probably told this story before somewhere, but she was a really cool older woman. She's probably in her 70s then, and I wasn't good at singing. I was in the choir class, and so I just wasn't good at singing. I couldn't play music yet. And she was just like, you can't sing, and you will be the narrator for our choir concerts, you know, like the person that's like, welcome. No, but she was cool. I was fine with it because I got an A+, right? Like I got the best grade in the class. And I also I didn't know how to sing. I just wasn't doing it right. So anyways, I would go into these practice rooms and I would just screw off with another buddy, and we were just screwing off all the time.
Yeah.
And we found this box of records, and we just thought they belonged to the school, you know, and we started breaking records. Like we started taking these records and we were smashing them on each other's heads. We were whipping them at each other and we were laughing and just being teenage boys. Just
I see where this is
total
going.
jerks. And then the teacher, Betty O'Toole, she came in and saw what we had done, and she had told me that she's like, some people have photo albums of their life to remember.
Yeah.
The chapters of their life. She's like, I had these albums.
Yeah.
And you broke them. And that's the only punishment she gave me. But
honestly, that's probably the harshest one she could have given.
It really was enough for me. Maybe it wasn't for the other kid, but it was enough for me to realize, like, oof.
Yeah.
Like, as a music lover, right?
Yeah,
like I just trashed somebody's music. And then that was her photo albums of her life, like her equivalent of photo albums of her life. And so some people that don't write music, they might have chapters of their life that are assigned to an album, you know, or tied to music.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm lucky enough to have both, right? My own and other people's that I can establishes like, oh, these were chapters of my life, you know, that I listened to this music. And this album meant a lot to me when I was going through this or that summer, all I listened to was this album, you know? But I still think that's an important story in my own musical career. I mean, if you call it a career, I'm not sure what career.
I call it a career.
Yeah. You know, sometimes I think career, I think like that's what people do for a living, you know? And so like, I don't know, just musical journey maybe, but
Sure.
but that was an important one to hear her say that and to understand that I was wrong for what I did.
Yeah.
And that like what music means to people. That was a real turning point, right? Because like I realized like, oh wow, some people, this is what their life is music. And it's not the photo albums. It's not the things that normal people have. And so I know that that's how I am now. And if somebody one day breaks all my records, I have it coming. But I will pass along that
will be
lesson,
paid.
and I will pass along that same lesson that I learned. Man, I remember almost getting hit by somebody had one of those Captain Crunch Bar popsicles, the short bread or whatever. Somebody ripped it out of a car at me, and I was walking down the road and it exploded on the wall next to me. It should have hit me. It didn't hit me, but I was like, wow. And then I remember like back to being in a car with a bunch of high school boys, you know, that were doing the same thing, you know, throwing stuff out of windows at houses and stuff. I'm like, yeah, I had this coming. As a matter of fact, they probably should have hit me.
And the cycle continued.
Yes, and there was also that part like, oh, the kids are all right, I guess. You know, boys are still complete idiots, and I knew I had it coming. Some people don't ever pay attention to that, like knowing when they have it coming. Like
It's the awareness thing we talked about earlier.
Yeah, they don't reflect on what they were like, and they're like, man, did I used to do something like this? You know, nobody wants to hold themselves accountable for that stuff sometimes, and I think that's an important part.
I know a bunch of friends who can relate to the things that you just said. Like, you know, some shit happens to them. They're like, huh, surprised it took this long. Okay.
Yeah. It's like, oh no, I've been expecting you. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely amazing. So a closing tradition that we have on the show is the previous guest leaves a question for the current guest, not knowing who the current guest may be. So the question left for you is, where do you think you will be in 5 years if you continue on the journey that you've been on?
Well, I'll tell you, I will probably be in the same place if I could, because 5 years ago, I was continuing on the same journey that I've been on, and I'm still running the same bandsaw at work, and I'm still singing to a lot of the same people. And so I think if I continue on the same path, I'm just going to keep getting the same thing, right? I think the important part is that I stop continuing on the path that I'm on, and I start stepping outside of that comfort zone. Yeah. And not to be long-winded, and I'll try not to, but I've just recently got back from a trip. I was gone for 2 weeks with a buddy, and we had backpacks, and we went from Washington State to Washington, D.C. with no agenda in mind, no plan.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was way awesome. Yeah. We had no plan except for to observe. And so we went out there and did that. We met cool people. Yeah. And we were on buses.
I love that.
And we were just like, we were having fun, but we were also, there was times it was uncomfortable. You know, like we were sleeping in weird places, and it was just like, whatever. But I feel like the second you get away from your normal surroundings, there's this little bubble that's around everybody's life. Once you break out of that, real things happen. And immediately characters present themselves to you, and real events that you don't experience happen, but you have to break through that bubble. So in 5 years from now, if I continue on the same path I'm on, I will probably be doing the exact same thing and have nothing different. So I think it's important that I continue to keep breaking out of that bubble that's over me. And I think that's important for anybody. Yeah. To just keep breaking out, because that's when the new things come in and you get new experiences, like you're breaking the simulation almost.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're able to recognize that. Most people never do, and they just do the same thing for decades, and then you know, all that time is
unless
lost.
You like what you're doing.
Unless you like what you're doing.
Which I do like what I'm doing. So if in 5 years I'm still doing the same thing, that's okay too. You know? I would have just, hope that I would have got out a little bit more, maybe. Sure. These new pair of boots.
Well, I'm very excited to check in and, see how the years treat you, and if the changes lead to the changes that you're.
Yeah, maybe we get together in 5 years, and I'll tell you, I'll have rings on each finger and a fur coat on. I was lying about everything I said.
Giant pimp collar.
Yeah.
It's going to be wonderful.
Everything, yeah.
But no, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah. Oh, before we break, where would you like to direct people's attention to, and where can people find you?
So just my name, Jack Mattingly. You can find me on social media. I will hit yes to the friend request. And And then if I don't like what you have to say, I'll probably just mute you, and we'll still be friends, but you just won't know that I don't see what you say.
There you go.
My newest band is Nurhachi. The band is Nurhachi, Nurhachi. It's a weird name, but that's the band I'm in now. We've got a new album that's going to be coming out soon. So you can find Nurhachi on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook.
Okay.
Soon you'll be able to find the album out. But that's where I would direct most of it, is to the new band I'm in, because that's where I'm focusing most of my time. But otherwise, yeah, you can just look my name up. Hopefully you got the right one when you hit friend or follow or whatever.
Yeah, I will put links to all of these things in the description box down below. Make it easy for people
that's
to
the world
find
we
you.
live in now, right?
But no, Jack, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much for coming here. I've learned a lot, both about songwriting itself, but your personal journey.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Well, thank you.
Cheers.
Yep, you too.